You don't actually believe your thoughts. You just don't know how to stop needing them. Because silence. Silence is when it all creeps back in. The ache, the memory, the thing you swore you moved on from, but still shapes every choice you make. So your mind runs, endlessly, strategizing, analyzing, clinging to control like it's oxygen. Because somewhere along the way, the only way to feel safe was to never stop thinking. Not to find answers, but to stay ahead of the pain. But what if overthinking isn't your flaw? What if it's your wound? Still trying to feel safe in a life that never gave you permission to rest. This isn't a video about calming down. It's not about mindset hacks or positive affirmations. Because if that worked, you wouldn't still be here, would you? This is about the war behind your eyes. The war no one sees when you smile. The war your nervous system still thinks it has to win. Every second of every day, overthinking isn't loud. It's lonely. It's quiet panic dressed up as productivity. It's the mind trying to outthink a childhood it never escaped. So no, this won't fix you, but might finally name you. The version of you beneath the noise. The one who's tired of surviving a life that keeps whispering it's still not safe to exhale. October 9th, 2011. Her name was Camille. She was 29 and hadn't slept through the night in almost 6 years. She told me the silence made her skin crawl. She said she didn't trust peace. Not because she didn't want it, but because every time things got quiet, that's when the memories came back. Her father had a temper like a thunderclap. Sudden, unforgiving. He didn't hit her often, but he didn't have to. The house was a battlefield of slammed doors and hell breaths. She learned early, if you anticipate the explosion, maybe you can survive it. If you keep thinking, maybe you can prevent the next disaster. So she became brilliant, fast, obsessive. She read body language like scripture, lived on edge like it was a calling. She called it intuition, but it was hypervigilance in a dress. And even at 29, in a different city, with a different job, no one yelling anymore. Her mind still scanned for fire, because her nervous system didn't care that it was over. It only knew how to keep her alive. So every night, when the world finally quieted down, Camille braced for war. In her own mind, against her own thoughts. It wasn't fear of the future. It was memory disguised as anxiety. Overthinking feels logical, but it's not. It's emotional noise wearing the mask of intelligence. And it starts early, not because you were dramatic, but because you were left alone with too much chaos. Maybe your parents were present, but unpredictable. Maybe love felt like walking on glass just to earn a drop of affection. Maybe no one yelled, but no one noticed either. And so your young mind did the only thing it could. It became hyper-aware, because a child would rather feel responsible than abandoned. If it's your fault, at least you have control. At least you can do something. That's where the spiral begins. You don't become a thinker. You become a scanner, searching for the invisible threat you were never allowed to name. This isn't intellect. It's vigilance. It's your nervous system whispering, don't relax. It's not safe yet. And over time, that vigilance becomes a personality. People say you're detail-oriented, introspective, smart, but they don't see the cost. The sleepless nights, the mental fatigue from overthinking, the ache of questioning everything, especially yourself. Because when your body still lives in survival, your thoughts aren't tools. They're shields, not to solve, but to defend. This is the sabotage loop. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system doesn't recognize calm as safety. It thinks calm means danger is coming. So you self-create the noise, the overthinking, the spiral of negative thinking, because it's familiar, and familiar feels safe even when it hurts. You might try mantras, journals, breath work, but nothing sticks because the root isn't mental. It's somatic. It's in the tissue of your childhood. The solution isn't stop thinking. It's relearning what safety feels like, so your brain doesn't have to overanalyze every breath to survive. And that starts with one shift, not in your mind, but in your perception. Stop asking, what's wrong with me? Start asking, when did I start needing to think this much just to feel okay? You don't need mental discipline. You need nervous system permission to stop fighting ghosts with logic, to stop using thoughts as armor. Because the real you, the one beneath the noise, was never too much. She was just too alone. Have you ever noticed how your mind races most when you actually need quiet the most? Like the moment you finally slow down, the storm shows up, uninvited, unrelenting. What does that silence bring up for you? Comment yes if you've ever pushed away peace because it felt unfamiliar. Or share your story because someone else needs to read it tonight. And if this already feels like it's naming something you've never said out loud, hit subscribe because we're not done yet. Not even close. Here's the part no one likes to admit. You don't actually want to stop overthinking. Not fully. Because if you did, you'd have to feel everything you've been thinking your way around. That's the shame no one talks about. You don't ruminate because you're weak. You ruminate because silence has teeth. In the quiet, there's a part of you still 7 years old, waiting for someone to come calm the chaos. But no one ever did. So now, you fill that silence with fear, with loops, with what-ifs. Because what would happen if you just stopped? Would it all come crashing down? Would you finally have to admit you don't feel safe in your own skin? See, the shame doesn't live in the overthinking itself. It lives in the fact that part of you still believes this is the only way to survive. You build a life on high alert. You've learned how to read between every line, spot every shift in tone, preempt every emotional threat. And when people praise you for your insight, for your intuition, you smile. But deep down, it's not a gift. It's a symptom. It's the result of never being allowed to just be. Because what if stillness isn't safe? What if calm is where the monsters used to hide? So now, you keep your mind moving. Because stopping means facing the grief of never being held when it mattered most. That's the secret your shame keeps. That overthinking isn't a flaw. It's a trauma response dressed in analysis. And until that grief is named, you'll keep calling your trauma a personality. You don't live in the present. You live in predictions. Your mind is a machine built not to experience life, but to scan it for risk. Every conversation becomes a code to crack. Every silence becomes a threat to brace for. Even joy gets dissected before it can be felt. And the most devastating part? You've learned to call this wisdom. You've worn it like armor, sharp, polished, untouchable. But underneath all that intellect is a child who never got to rest. You want to stop the spiral of negative thinking, but the spiral is the only thing that's ever made you feel prepared. As long as you're thinking, you're not frozen. As long as you're spinning, you're not drowning. But here's the truth. You've mistaken movement for safety. You don't feel peace because your body still thinks the war isn't over. And so your mind keeps fighting, not for clarity, but for control. But control is not peace. Control is fear in disguise. And it will drain you until there's nothing left but fragments of a person who was never allowed to just exist. There's a cost to staying in survival, a cost to being the smartest person in the room, but never the most present. You lose your joy. You lose your capacity to feel wonder without immediately analyzing it. You lose sleep, then intimacy, then yourself, and worst of all, you start to mistake the ache in your chest for normal. You become fluent in exhaustion until even your dreams feel loud, until even your rest feels like work. You were never meant to carry this much thought. You were meant to feel, to play, to love without bracing, to wake up and not be haunted by what-ifs. But your nervous system still lives in the house where you had earned safety. So now, you try to earn peace with punishment. You bully your mind with routines, with gratitude lists you don't feel, with mantras that taste like lies, because you're trying to think your way into healing something that happened in your body. And the world applauds you for it. They call you disciplined, high-functioning, a survivor. But survival isn't life. Survival is a cage with no sound. And the longer you live in it, the more your thoughts become weapons turned inward. This is what Jung meant when he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But let me say it how your nervous system understands. If you don't feel the memory, your mind will keep reliving it, and you'll call it overthinking. What if you're not broken? What if your overthinking is just your nervous system begging for a safety it never got to feel? Not a concept, not a breathwork technique, but the kind of safety that sinks into your bones, that tells your mind, you can stop now. I've got you. But here's the part that shatters people. You have to grieve the version of you that only knew chaos, because peace will feel like death until you bury the false self that was born to survive it. The overachiever, the analyzer, the caretaker, the one who made sure everything stayed okay, even while dying inside. That version of you was necessary, but now it's killing you slowly. You don't need another affirmation. You need a funeral for the identity that kept you hyper-vigilant, for the performance that got you love, for the thoughts that kept you safe in unsafe places. Because those thoughts are not you. They're echoes of a younger self, screaming for someone to understand. And no one did. So you became the listener, the overthinker, the emotional detective, trying to decode the behavior of others, just to avoid the rejection you could already smell coming. And now, you want to heal, but part of you is still convinced that if you let go of the pain, you'll lose who you are. That's the trap. You don't know where the trauma ends and you begin. So you stay stuck, intellectually aware, emotionally frozen, desperate to fix a wound, but terrified of what it will cost to feel it. So here's the dare. Can you mourn the survival version of yourself without needing to rush into the healed one? Can you sit in the in-between space where nothing makes sense, but everything inside you knows this isn't it anymore? That's the doorway. That's the real answer to how to stop overthinking. You don't stop the thoughts by silencing them. You stop feeding them with fear. And that only happens when you finally feel safe enough to rest. Not just physically, but spiritually, cellularly. Like the war is over, even if your body forgot how to believe it. You keep asking, how do I stop overthinking? But the real question is, who are you when there's nothing left to fix? No problem to anticipate. No disaster to prepare for. No one to read between the lines for. Just you, in the stillness. Does that feel peaceful, or does it feel like a void? Because if silence feels dangerous, if your own presence feels foreign, You were never taught to be human without performing. You've been trying to think your way into freedom, but thinking got you stuck. Thinking kept you safe by keeping you absent. It's not your thoughts that need rewiring. It's your relationship to safety. You were never meant to be this mentally exhausted, this emotionally watchful, this spiritually starved, but you adapted to survive. And now your brilliance is also your burden. So let this be your permission to grieve the sharpness, to mourn the mind that never got to rest. Because beyond the noise, beyond the spiral, beyond the performance, they're the you that doesn't need to anticipate pain. A you that isn't made of tension. A you that breathes without thinking. And maybe, just maybe, you're not overthinking. You're overwaiting for someone to finally say, it's okay to stop now. The war is over, and you made it out. If this named something inside you, subscribe, not for more answers, but for a place where the questions are finally allowed to breathe. And if this brought up anything, share your story in the comments. Someone else is unraveling, just like you. And your truth might be the thing that keeps them going one more night.